Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something seriously fascinating. We're going to unpack a deeply complex piece of historical, geopolitical, and theological rhetoric, Reverend Sun Myung Moon's 1983 speech titled Our Position from Now On. Now, regardless of your personal background, analyzing this text gives us an incredible window into Cold War-era anxieties, and specifically how radical, world-building ideologies attempt to solve them. We're going to break down its philosophical claims and its sociological proposals strictly through the lens of the source material. We aren't here to take any ideological sides whatsoever. We're just here to understand exactly how this text attempts to rewrite the global world order. Picture this. It's 1983. The Cold War is absolutely at its height. But this speech doesn't just look out and see a bipolar world of East versus West. No, it introduces a triad. The text says, three distinct worlds are existing simultaneously and competing with each other: the free world, the communist world, and the unification world. That is the foundational quote for everything we're about to explore. It positions the unification movement not just as a religious group, but as a literal geopolitical competitor on the world stage. So that really begs a massive question, doesn't it? In a deeply divided world, who is actually going to lead the new world order? The speech argues that both the United States and the Soviet Union are vying for that top spot, but that both are fundamentally incapable of achieving true global peace. Over the course of this explainer, we'll show you exactly how the text attempts to answer this central question, moving from political critique to profound Eastern philosophy, and finally, down to a very specific social mechanism. All right, let's look at our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the three competing worlds, the horizontal deadlock, and the vertical solution. Then we'll get into Sung-Sung versus Hung-Sung, transcending cultural barriers, and finish up with God's love power. Okay, Section 1, Three Competing Worlds, and the Geopolitical Landscape of 1983. To really grasp this speech, you've got to see how it categorizes the big global players of the era. It breaks them down into three systems. First up, the free world. It's centered on the United States. It operates on what the text calls a horizontal dimension, and its current state, deadlocked. Next, the communist world, centered on the Soviet Union, also operating horizontally, but categorized as failing internally. And finally, the unification world. Its center isn't a nation at all, it's God. Its dimension is vertical, and its trajectory is listed as rising. The entire argument hinges on this categorization. But you might be wondering, why exactly does the text claim the first two systems are failing? Let's get into that with Section 2, the horizontal deadlock, and the flaws of democracy and communism. The speaker pulls absolutely no punches here. The argument is that both major Cold War powers share fatal flaws that trap them in a horizontal deadlock. Basically, they're stuck. The primary shared flaw? A relentless focus on self-centered national interests. For the free world, the critique is that it's pushed the divine totally into the background, which makes core concepts like freedom entirely subjective. The definition just constantly changes. On the flip side, communism is critiqued as being purely material. The speech points to massive internal fractures, like the intense tensions between the Soviets and Red China, as proof that it's failing. It even highlights North Korea, pointing out the irony that passing power from father to son, like Kim Il-sung to his heir, is basically a hereditary monarchy masquerading as a workers' revolution. Because these systems are stuck on a horizontal, human-centric plane, the text claims they are ultimately doomed. Which brings us to Section 3, the vertical solution, introducing a God-centered paradigm. So if horizontal human politics are completely deadlocked, what's the way out? Well, the speech offers a direct alternative to both democracy and communism, and it calls it Godism. This is a vertical worldview that places God as the absolute starting point for global peace. It's essentially putting God in the driver's seat of history. And what's really fascinating here is the massive shift in how peace is actually viewed. While the democratic and communist worlds see peace as this distant, super hard-to-reach goal at the finish line, Godism posits that peace is a mandatory starting point. It's something that occurs the exact moment humanity aligns vertically with this central divine figure. Let's dive deeper into Section 4, Sung-San versus Hyung-Sang, and the philosophical underpinnings. Now, to back up this vertical worldview, the text gets into some pretty dense Eastern philosophical terminology. The real key to the argument lies in a concept called Sung-Sung. The text defines Sung-Sung as the internal world of cause and substance. It is permanent, it's unchanging, and it's absolute. The core argument here is that you simply cannot build a permanent world order on a foundation that is constantly shifting, like human politics. You have to build it on an absolute, unchanging spiritual anchor. This sets up a massive philosophical conflict between Seungsang and its counterpart, Hyungsang, where Seungsang is the internal, permanent cause, Hyungsang is the external, variable result. Think of it like the superficial layer of reality, like crashing waves on the surface of the ocean, constantly moving and changing. The speech makes a really bold claim here. It says the democratic and communist worlds only operate on that superficial Hyungsang level. They are fighting over shifting material things. Meanwhile, the unification world claims to anchor its ideology entirely on the Seungsang level. By focusing on the absolute cause rather than the variable result, the speech argues that its eventual victory is practically a logical certainty. Moving right along to Section 5, Transcending Cultural Barriers and Forging a Universal Nation. Because, let's be honest, high-level philosophy alone doesn't change the world on the ground. To translate all this into sociological action, the speech takes a hard look at America's most famous metaphor. It says the United States has been a melting pot, but even with these nationalities, the melting pot system did not quite work out. People cannot completely digest the barriers of former enemy relationships. The speaker is arguing that Anglo-Saxon culture, despite all its great democratic ideals, lacks a clear enough worldview to truly unite historical enemies, like the English, the French, and the Germans, even when they live within its own borders. So, what's their practical fix for this? The unification movement proposes an incredibly literal tool: international and interracial marriage. The speech details how taking people from opposing historical backgrounds, say matching a Japanese citizen with an American, forces the dissolution of borders at the most intimate family level. The goal isn't just diversity for the sake of diversity. The goal is the creation of families that belong to no single country, but rather to a universal nation. It's an attempt to digest cultural, racial, and national barriers on a scale that horizontal political systems simply can't match. Finally, we reach Section 6, God's Love Power, the engine of ideological change. To actually pull off something on that massive of a scale, individuals need serious motivation. So the text introduces a behavioral mandate called GL Power, God's Love Power, and it outlines a very specific, almost mathematical process for getting it. Step 1, an individual must totally abandon self-centeredness and commit to a sacrificial way of life for others. Step 2, they have to serve humanity and God above their own immediate family, tribe, or nation. Step 3, the text claims that in return, the individual receives this GL power in a quantity that is proportionately equal to the exact sacrifice they gave. This power, the speech explicitly states, doesn't come from having money or a high intellect. It comes solely from the practice of living for others. And here's where it gets really fascinating. To assess his followers, the speaker uses this wild metaphor, the GL telescope. Now, this isn't a physical object. It's a spiritual lens. He claims that by using this telescope, he can speak to a person for just 3 minutes and completely gauge their spiritual capacity, their depth of selfless sacrifice, and exactly how much GL power they have inside them. It's a very clever rhetorical device used to reinforce his authority and really urge his followers to prove their commitment to the cause. Wow, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today. From the tense geopolitics of 1983 to the deep concepts of Seungsang and Hyungsang, all the way down to the idea of the GL telescope. The core argument of this 1983 speech is that only a vertical, God-centered ideology, fueled by radical, literal personal sacrifice, can break the deadlock of human history. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. In a deeply divided world, what power can truly transcend our borders? Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.